I spent 11 years being the human grease in a corporate machine that didn't even care to learn my name. While middle management peacocked in glass-walled conference rooms, I was the one down in the mud, resolving logistical nightmares from Shenzhen to Detroit with nothing more than a lukewarm mug of coffee and a burner phone. My immediate supervisor, Tyler, was the kind of guy who thought wearing expensive cologne substituted for having actual skills. He built his entire career on a simple strategy. Whenever something went wrong, he blamed the system. Whenever I fixed it, he took credit in front of the executive board. When I pulled off an emergency jet transport for micro-components during a blizzard, Tyler sent a company-wide email thanking himself for his decisive leadership. My reward? An invite to a roundtable where my only official duty was fetching room-temperature sparkling water for upper management, while Tyler presented my 12-page supply chain analysis as his own. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just kept showing up early, leaving late, and being the safety net for people who didn't even notice I was holding them up. Until the microchip crisis hit. Our highest-grossing product, a calibration system that brought in over $100 million annually, relied entirely on a single proprietary microchip. It wasn't manufactured on a global assembly line. It came from one specialized factory in Eastern Europe run by a founder named Lazar Kavox. Lazar was an old-school industrialist. He didn't care about polished PowerPoint decks. He cared about trust, handshakes, and respect. When Lazar sent an urgent email stating his factory was reallocating production priorities and required an in-person representative at their annual vendor summit in Hungary, I knew what was at stake. German startups and massive Chinese conglomerates were already circling his factory like hawks. We were about to lose our entire supply line. I put together a clean, data-backed proposal requesting a $2,000 travel budget for economy airfare and a modest hotel. I walked it into Tyler's office, explaining that this trip was the only firewall keeping our primary revenue stream alive. Tyler didn't even look up from his phone. He just let out a wet, condescending laugh. $2,000 for what, Brittany? A paid vacation in some Eastern European backwater. He waved his hand dismissively. We aren't funding your little getaway. He thought he was being financially prudent. In reality, he had just signed off on his own career's death warrant. I didn't argue. I smiled that tight, frozen smile every experienced corporate worker knows by heart, said, understood, and walked out. That night, sitting in my quiet kitchen, I made a choice. I wasn't going to let my career be dictated by a man whose greatest professional achievement was locking 3 interns in a broom closet during a team-building escape room. I used 3 days of my own personal time off, spent my personal savings on a cramped economy ticket, and booked a budget hotel in Hungary. Before I left, I registered a private LLC, Sharp Point Logistics. I also dusted off old files from over a decade ago. Back in 2012, Lazar's daughter, Alina, had visited our US site for an audit. When her team abandoned her during a critical system crash and a sudden illness, I was the only person who stayed by her side, got her medical help, and looked after her. That single act of human decency, buried under 10 years of corporate neglect, was about to become my ultimate leverage. When I arrived at the summit in Hungary, jet-lagged and exhausted, Lazar was waiting for me. There were no flashy corporate representatives from my company. In fact, we were the only major client that hadn't sent an official executive delegation. Over a simple dinner, Lazar looked at me with deep, quiet respect. Your company sent no one, he said. They ignored 4 of my calls. But you showed up. I always show up, I told him. Lazar placed a hand on the table. I am too old to deal with arrogant men in polished suits who treat my life's work like disposable noise. I don't trust your corporate executives, Brittany. But I trust you. You helped my daughter when it gave you no corporate advantage. You see people, not just numbers. He slid a document across the table. It wasn't just a renewal contract for my employer. It was an agreement granting Sharp Point Logistics, my personal company, the exclusive North American distribution rights for his proprietary microchips. From that moment on, if my employer wanted those chips, they wouldn't buy them from Lazar. They would have to buy them directly from me. I signed the agreement with steady hands. When I returned to the office the following week, I said nothing. I walked past the cubicles, sat at my desk, and listened to Tyler boast in a morning meeting about how solid our European vendor relationships were, taking credit for numbers he hadn't touched. I just smiled. 2 days later was the quarterly board of directors meeting on the 12th floor. The room was packed with senior executives, legal counsel, and the CEO. Tyler was at the head of the table, clicking through a flashy presentation deck, proudly showing a graph that claimed our microchip supply was locked in for the next 2 years. "We've built an untouchable foundation of vendor stability," Tyler declared smoothly. Right on cue, there was a firm knock on the glass door. A courier walked in and handed a sealed, red-stamped envelope directly to the CEO. The CEO opened it, expecting a standard corporate notification. But as his eyes scanned the paper, the color drained entirely from his face. His posture collapsed. He read it once, twice, and then silently handed it to the general counsel. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, read the document, and looked up, scanning the room until his eyes landed directly on me. "Where is Brittany Sharp?" the lawyer asked, his voice dead silent. I stood up calmly from the back row, smoothing my blazer. "Right here." Tyler chuckled nervously, looking confused. "Brittany, what's going on here?" "Inside that envelope," I announced clearly, "is a certified notification from Kvox Technologies. As of this week, all North American distribution for their proprietary microchips has been transferred exclusively to an independent conduit." Tyler sneered. "What are you talking about? Through us?" "No," I said, meeting his eyes with absolute calm. "Through Sharp Point Logistics, LLC." A suffocating silence fell over the boardroom. The general counsel turned to the CEO. "It's airtight. She holds the exclusive distribution rights. Every clause is legally binding." Tyler's face went pale. "You can't do this. This is extortion. You're holding the company hostage over a 20-year partnership." I walked down the center of the boardroom table, pulled 3 documents from my portfolio, and laid them neatly in front of the CEO. "This isn't extortion, Tyler. Extortion is demanding money to fix a problem you created. This is business," I said firmly. "The exact business you refused to fund when you denied a $2,000 travel budget and called my work a vacation." The first document was my formal resignation, effective immediately. The second was the notice of vendor transition. The third was my new pricing structure as an independent distributor, featuring a 300% markup on unit costs, non-negotiable rush fees, and strict payment terms. The CEO looked up at Tyler, his eyes burning with a mixture of cold fury and sheer embarrassment. He realized in an instant that a $2,000 denial had just cost the company millions in bottom-line revenue. Tyler tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no words came out. His authority, his posture, and his career dissolved right there on the 12th floor. I picked up my bag, looked at the board one last time, and offered a soft, final statement. "You thought the trip was too expensive. Now you get to find out what cheap really costs." I walked out of that glass room, down the elevator, and into the afternoon sun, no longer an invisible fixer, but the owner of the supply chain.